My name is Tom Pomerantz, and we're going to be spending approximately the next 50 minutes going over the first in a series of sessions entitled Principles and Practices of Community Building. And this session will focus on quality of interaction, ways of behaving courteously, and certainly not just to the people who we support, but to all people. Our focus, however, today is primarily the kind of pitfalls we can find ourselves in interacting with the people who we support. I want to start out by making a comment. I want you to know that they lied to you. They're lying to you. They're telling you when many of these people move out of large state developmental centers, they're telling you they move to the community. It's a lie. The community isn't a place. You can't find it. You can't locate it. You got to build it. You got to create it. And that is our theme. The truth is, and many of you in this room know the truth, that when many of these folks move out of large state-operated centers, many of these folks are merely moving from one institution to another. The only difference is many of the places that they go to, whether they're residences or day programs, tend to have fewer people than the place they moved out of. So let's talk about the skills, the behaviors in which we need to engage in order to ensure the environments where we provide services are not institutions. An institution is not a place. It is a state of mind. The institution is not a place. It is us. You can't blow it up or close it down, my dear friends. And the institution is found in our behavior. That's what our discussion is about. How do you and I need to behave? How do we need to relate to the people we support to help assure that they have a quality life? The people who we support, in many cases, or at least in institutions, live pretend lives. You see, they're not real lives like yours and mine. They're scheduled, managed, and organized. I had someone not too long ago raise their hand and say, "Well, Tom, I hear you, but what's your point? Your life is scheduled, managed, and organized." I said, yes. There's a big difference, however. Who manages, schedules, and organizes my life? You all know the answer to that, right? Yeah. My wife. Yeah, well, you've not met my wife? Yeah, she does all that. There's an individual who has been a very important influence in my life, professional influence in my life, if you will. His name is Dr. Burton Blatt. And among Dr. Blatt's many accomplishments are the maxims that he uses, the pithy little phrases that help us remember things of importance. And here are one of his statements, and it comes from a publication called Pandemonium. And it's a wonderful statement. It says, "The law of the institution is to know right and do wrong, think well, and behave poorly." The law of the institution is to know right and do wrong, think well, and behave poorly. What's our point today? Our point today is not only thinking well, but it is behaving well also. Dr. Blatt said, "There is a hell on earth." That's what he said. And in America, there is a special inferno. It's called the institution. Do you all remember from 10 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, what an institution is? It's what? Real loud. What's an institution? A state of mind. An institution's not a place. It is a state of mind. It is not a place. And institutions are like fish aquariums. People maintained on display, fed and cared for. People maintained on display, fed and cared for. And you know, like with aquariums, how people go over to the aquarium and they put their nose up against the glass to see what's on the inside? That's what people frequently do in day programs, residences, group homes. You know, when they are operated like institutions, they just sort of come and observe and see what's happening on the inside. And they give that observation a lot of names. This is what they call it. Sometimes they say is, "We invite you to grand rounds." You ever heard that one? "We invite you to come and observe." "We invite you to come and tour." "We invite you to do a walkthrough." They give it many different names so that you can see that the people who receive services here or live here, what? Have no life? And I have a question. Why would anyone invite other people to come and observe when the people who receive supports or services there have no life? And I have at least what I think is an answer for it. I think that the people who make the invitation feel like they're doing great. They've met the standard, if you will, the expectations for a quality life. They may be CARF, AC accreditation, Medicaid waiver requirements, ICFMR requirements, and they know they just had a survey, they just had a review, and they did really well. So why wouldn't they want to invite people in to see the good job that they do? But you know what you and I are going to be doing now? We're going to raise the bar. We are going to raise the bar. We're going to go beyond just the accreditation expectations. We're going to look at the quality of our interaction with the people who we support. And there are hallmarks of the institution. Let's take a look at some here very quickly. Staff wear smocks or outdoor clothing. You'll see the staff come in the place that they work, and they'll usually keep their coats on all the time, or they wear smocks, you know. And I guess that's to separate themselves from the people who they support. Sometimes I ask staff, why are you wearing a coat? And they says, well, I'm really cold. Well, if you're cold, perhaps the people who receive services and supports there are cold as well. Maybe we need to do something with the temperature. Clocks blink or set to the wrong time. You go in, and they're hardly ever set to the right time. I guess it doesn't make any difference because the people who receive services and supports there can't tell time, huh? And people stay indoors. Very common. Even on the nicest of days, they stay indoors. And you know what's really interesting? I go to places where there are men and women your age who have never even learned to walk around puddles. Honestly. I have a granddaughter who's 2.5. And as soon as she could walk, we would be outside and teach her to walk around puddles. Can you imagine people our age who have never even been given the opportunity to learn to walk around a puddle? Or people who have not learned to negotiate the ice. You don't have a lot of ice around here, but I'm in a lot of places where it's icy, and there are adults who are never even given the opportunity to learn how to negotiate the ice. Or people who have never even been taught how to hold an umbrella. I mean, the climate here is obviously very sunny, and sometimes you'll see on very hot days people walking around holding umbrellas just to keep the sun off of them. Obviously, people also use umbrellas to stay dry. But yet there are people our age who have never been given the opportunity to even learn how to hold an umbrella to keep the sun off them or to keep the water off them. On hot days, we instinctively, some people will just pick up a piece of paper or cardboard and start doing this. But yet I go to places where there are people your age who are very hot, and because of the lack of their intellectual abilities, don't know how to do this. You know, children, typical children, learn this vicariously. It's very hot, and they see some adult do this, and they'll pick it up, and they'll start doing that themselves. But yet there are people who we support that no one has taken the time to show them how to do this. Now, my point is, this list in and of itself is not important, because the list is an infinite list. It is representative of the relationship that we have with people. And when you care about people, we bond with them. And we teach them these type of skills. You know that there are places that I go that the sun is shining brightly into somebody's eyes, and the individual doesn't even know how to do this. You and I learned that when we were very little. We saw someone take their hand and cup it over their eye to keep the sun out of their eye. But yet I will go to places where people have significant intellectual limitations, and they don't even know how to shield the sun from their eyes because no one has taught them to do that. Or there are people who don't know how to cool themselves with a wet cloth. These are the kind of relationship skills that we have a responsibility to impart to the people who we support. Other hallmarks of the institution is staff display flat affects. Staff walk around like this, sort of like, gee, I think I'm a mushroom. They keep me in the dark and feed me manure. You know, they walk around with the flat affects. We have to walk around with the affects that smile and says, gee, I'm happy I'm here. It is a relationship skill. Smiling says, I care about you. I want you in my space. I enjoy your presence. Versus walking around with that flat affect the way some staff might. Staff prepare to leave their shifts 5 minutes ahead of time. Gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. Because in the institution, don't forget what the institution is. It's what? Let's say it loud. It's what? State of mind. That's right. Yes, it's merely a job. And people are there to put bread on the table. The individual who works in that kind of role in an institution just as easily could be working in a manufacturing plant, putting light bulbs in corrugated boxes. It makes no difference to them. It's merely a job to earn money. So they tend to prepare to leave their shift 5 minutes ahead of time. And visitors are seldom greeted. People can walk into the room or walk into the residence, and there's no one really ever to come on over and say, hello, it's nice to have you here. Nor are the people supported in going over and greeting visitors that come into their space. The skills of courtesy are to support the men and women who we provide services to and teach them how to greet visitors. Holiday decorations remain up at least 30 days past the event. You know, it could be April, the end of April, middle of April. I walk into the room and I see hearts and Valentine decorations, and I say to the staff, boy, these Valentine's decorations look really nice. The staff says, yes, we know, we got to take them down. Sunday's Easter. You know, indicative of the institutional mindset. And perhaps the most significant characteristic of an institution is people wait. They wait. And the word wait is the most vulgar of all terms. The word wait implies that the person's time is of little meaning or value, and it's under somebody else's control. People wait. And I would ask you, what do you think many of the men and women did who lived at large state-operated residences, perhaps? What were they doing there much of their time? They were waiting, and now, in many cases, they leave those places, move into smaller residences, come to day programs that are community-based, and frequently we see them continue to wait, the most vulgar of all terms, rather than engaging in activities of meaning and value. Well, the question is, who's empowered to fix it? Look at that list. Who is empowered to fix it? It's you. If it's to be, it's up to me. It's you. This does not reside with a supervisor. It does not reside with a manager and administrator. It resides with direct contact staff. You are where the rubber meets the road. You are where the needle touches the phonograph record. You are where the pen is put to paper. All else is secondary. When it comes to quality of interaction, it resides with each one of you. And let's now look at the quality of that interaction. You know, as I stand here, you need to know, my anxiety runs high. And my anxiety is running high not because I'm here doing this presentation. My anxiety runs high because I look down and I see this hand as the offending appendage. How often have I seen this hand go over to men and women who are old enough to be our parents and touch them as if they are children? How often have I seen staff go over to men and women and take their hand and put it on their head and touch them as if they are children? How, by the way, do you know that I go to places, folks, and I literally will see staff walking around holding people's hands? If we have to hold their hand, marry them or get engaged to them, but we don't hold their hand. It's so bad in some of the places that I go to that we have to put signs up on the wall. We call them prompts to let staff know appropriate ways to use their hands. And the sign that we put up when staff tend to engage in a lot of hand-holding is our no towing sign, right? We tow cars, not people. This hand can be a hand of courtesy or it can be a hand to devalue. Do not hold people's hands. We tend to hold the hands of lovers, hold the hands of children. I recognize that many of you support people who may have issues of gait, being unsteady when they're walking. Well, if somebody is unsteady when they're walking, we don't hold their hand. What we do is you encourage them to take your arm or you take their arm. That's how we assist them. Some of you support people who may have visual impairment, and obviously they can't see where they're going. Well, you don't assist them by taking their hand and towing them. You encourage them to take their hand, put it on your elbow, and you're a half stride ahead, and you lead them. Some of you support people who may get very confused, and you may verbally request, hey, Bob, can you come here? But they don't understand what that means. And so we can assist them by taking our hand and putting it on their shoulder and prompting them to go in the right direction. Holding hands encourages dependence. So we must remember how we use this hand. It can be a hand of courtesy or a hand to devalue. Remember that I shared with you just a moment or two ago my concern when sometimes we see staff who take their hands and go on over and do that to people, right? And I really believe staff don't do that because they're mean-spirited. They don't do that because they're malevolent. I have my own explanation why some people do that. I'll share that with you in a moment. But this hand, sometimes we engage in what I would refer to as melon patting. We must remember, pat your dog, pat your cat. We don't pat the men and women who we support. I have a news article I thought you would find interesting. I want to share with you. I cut it out during the elections. It was in many papers, and it's not intended to be some kind of political comment, but I thought you'd find it interesting. You'll remember the name John Edwards. Edwards rankles local advocates for disabled, the Center for Disability Rights, knocked presidential hopeful Edwards' speech, saying he didn't have sign language interpreters and instead patted the heads of people using wheelchairs. Quote, "Just because I'm a woman who uses a wheelchair does not mean anyone should be patting me on the head." Now, what's important about this is Mr. Edwards was a well-known, famous litigation attorney. The man was brilliant. I mean, he's a very intelligent man. He's traveled the world. He even had handlers, politicians at this level, whenever they engage in political rallies or they go to a Native American reservation to engage in, campaigning or a Catholic mass. They usually have people working for them to tell them, how do you behave in those various venues? Even though he had handlers, look at how he ended up behaving, patting somebody on the head. And I have an explanation for this, by the way. You want to know what my explanation is? He's not mean-spirited. He didn't do that because unconsciously or consciously he said, I don't like people with disabilities. I think he did that because he is ignorant. And that's good news. When I see people behaving in socially inappropriate ways, when I see staff not using the skills of courtesy, the good news is I think it's almost always because of ignorance. If you told me, well, Tom, the reason the staff tow people around here is that they don't see them as human beings and that's how they respond to them, or the reason they engage in melon patting is because they don't value them, I don't know what I'd do. I think ignorance is good news because we have a cure for ignorance, and you all know what that cure is. It is knowledge. It is knowing the socially acceptable ways of behaving. Now, touch is very important. Touch is an essential element of the human experience. Unfortunately, many of the men and women who we support may only be touched or frequently touched contingently. Contingently means we end up touching people when they need assistance in bathing, they need assistance in having their clothes changed, or transferring from their wheelchair to a chair. Can you imagine having a life and almost the only time that somebody touched you was contingently? Perhaps wouldn't you become touch resistive? We need to touch people because we value them, because we want them in our space. It's an expression of saying, you are a good and valued human being. Touch people non-contingently. Touch people non-contingently. I'm touching you because I value you. And yes, there are many considerations that must be made when touching people non-contingently. And here are some of the considerations. The nature of the activity. I mean, we've all seen one man touch another on the rear. We have no problems with that. When you watch a Monday night football game, that's what, the coach may do. Or you go to a collegiate basketball game and the coach touches one of the varsity players, go on out, Because appropriateness of touch is influenced by the nature of the activity, sex of the individuals. Women tend to touch women differently than men touch women, differently than men touch men. Appropriateness of touch is influenced by cultural norms. I mean, we know we can all go home tonight, watch television, we will see during family hour on the 3 major networks men kissing each other. And none of us will be bothered by that. We're all comfortable with that. Just watch the news. That's how men in the Middle East greet each other. They use 3 kisses. It has to do with the nature of the activity. What's my point? I'm not even going to continue through the list. If we cannot become comfortable with this, we will tend not to touch people non-contingently. We will tend to only touch them for our purposes, to get them to do the things that we want them to do. So effective staff must be able to process this list and say, how do I touch? What influences my touch? Commonly, there's a question that arises with respect to touch. Very common question. People frequently ask me, well, Tom, how do you feel about hugging? That's an important interactional skill. Remember, we're talking about skills of interaction, quality of interaction, skills of courtesy. Well, here's my response to hugging. I can't imagine what it would be like to go to my grave and never be hugged. I'm going to say it again. I can't imagine what it would be like to go to my grave and never be hugged. And I recognize, that's me. You know, I recognize that there are some people, because of traumatic events in their life or things that have happened to them, are very uncomfortable, uneasy about being hugged. And I certainly respect that. Having said that, the little old lady with the blue hair standing in line at McDonald's will scream very loud when a 28-year-old man with Down syndrome who she's never met before comes on over and hugs her. Again, the little old lady with the blue hair standing in line at McDonald's will scream very loud when the 28-year-old man with Down syndrome who she's never met before comes on over and hugs her. Well, what does that tell us? Does that say, don't hug the people we support? Of course not. What it says is, if the person who you are hugging is unable to differentiate you, who's a significant person in their life, from the total stranger, we have a moral, ethical, and legal obligation to assess the appropriateness of our behavior. All I know is when I am out and doing training on site, and some man or woman comes over to hug me who I've never met before, with whom I have no relationship, it is an indictment perhaps of the place where they received services or the place that they had received services, because that behavior was learned and it was tolerated, though demonstrated in socially unacceptable ways. So remember the concept of hugging, and I would encourage you to do what I do. Wherever I go, I carry a device. I take a device with me, and if anyone comes on over and hugs me, and it's an unwarranted hug, I will take out this device and I will use it on them. And I am not going to get permission from your Human Rights Committee. May I show you what the device is? Anybody come on over and tries to give me a hug, I will use this device on them. You got it. An outstretched hand is sure to stop an undesired hug. An outstretched hand is sure to stop an undesired hug. So if somebody comes on over to you and tries to hug you, we use this hand. The purpose of the hand is to establish boundaries. It's a physical boundary as well as a psychological boundary for many people. The purpose of the hand demonstrates the behavior that we want the individual to engage in. This is what I want you to do. We don't so much focus on what we don't want the person to do. We focus on this is the appropriate behavior. And the individual is always deserving of an explanation. I'm sorry, I don't know you well enough to hug you. I'll be happy to shake your hand. Again, I'm sorry, I don't know you well enough to hug you. I'll be happy to shake your hand. The fear or concern that one might have of, gee, I've hurt that person's feelings because I told them I didn't want to hug them, is far offset by what we are giving them in terms of learning socially acceptable ways of behaving. It's a very important concept associated with interacting in ways of courtesy. One of the first things I do when I go into any environment is I do this. I listen. And if I can tell by the sound of the voice intonation that the voices that are being used when the staff are interacting with the men and women they support is a different voice intonation than when they're interacting with each other, we know we have a very serious problem. You see, the voice is controlled by the brain. Assuming that the individual does not have pathology in their vocal cords, the voice is controlled by the brain. And if the brain perceives they're really children in adult bodies, it will cause the voice to go, "Hi, how are you? You look so nice. That's such a pretty blouse you have. Did you choose it yourself?" I must say, generally, we're getting much better. The first thing I used to do whenever I went into any environment was this. But now I've moved to this. So the voices that we used are important. Here is the behavior that we need to engage in. Speak to others the way you would wish to be spoken to. Speak to others the way you wish to be spoken to. And as I share these tools with you, again, tools, ways of behaving, ways of interacting with people, I wish I could tell you that I was taught these tools when I was in college. I wish I could tell you that my supervisors early on in my career took me aside and says, "Well, Tom, this is how you need to behave when you're interacting with others." I was never so fortunate. No one ever took me aside and gave me this information. I will never forget, I was an assistant superintendent of a very large developmental center, having only been there perhaps a couple weeks. And I go over to this building, they called it the program building, and walk into this room. It was an ADL room, Activities of Daily Living room. And this was before the days that we really respected people. And the room was filled with many, many age and appropriate items, though the individuals were in the room of your age. They're about in their 30s, late 20s, and so forth. Must have been about 10 men and women in there, the majority of whom had a lot of adaptive devices to assist in their mobility, wheelchairs, highly adapted, H harnesses, abductors, Velcro straps, people using flared leg walkers that were seated. And again, the room was filled with age-appropriate items. You know, those round rings that people stack intended for children. And they used to give people back then pegs to put in pegboards, you know, things that have no meaning, have no dignity. And here comes this man, perhaps about 34 years old, carrying 5 or 6 of those play school puzzles, wooden puzzles with 3 or 4 pieces. Had a partial brace on his left leg, so he's walking like this, dragging his leg behind him. Right arm is contracted, holding 5 or 6 of those puzzles. I believe on the bottom they indicate 24 to 36 months developmental level. And the man's hair was somewhat disheveled, lip closures poor. He's drooling on the floor. Right arm is contracted. He's trying to balance those puzzles. He has kyphosis, and he's walking like this to get over to the table. And I wanted to be nice. So I go over to him and I said, "Hi, are those your puzzles? Boy, I'll bet you those will really be fun to put together. Oh, look at the fire truck and Snoopy's going up the ladder. Oh, won't that be fun? You want to take the puzzles over to the table and I'll help you put them together, okay?" And I'll never forget, the man has been over in this position and very slowly attempts to get himself upright, turns to me, looks me dead in the eye, and he says, "Excuse me, my name's Harold. I'm the instructor. Can I help you?" Do you know how I felt? And I deserved it. I felt about this big. What was I supposed to say? "Excuse me, that's how I talk to people who I perceive have intellectual limitations"? From that day forward, by the way, he had a master's degree in special education. The man had cerebral palsy. He was the teacher in the room. From that day forward, I learned a very important lesson for me. I speak to people the way I wish to be spoken to. It's a very important skill, tool, behavior of courtesy. However, got to tell you the whole story. The truth is, we really shouldn't be speaking to all people the same. We need what is called differentiated speech. That's the truth, differentiated speech. There are many factors that influence how we speak to people. There are some people who you support who have a hearing impairment. And it's not corrected by a hearing aid. Perhaps they don't have one. In order for them to hear you, it may be necessary for you to raise your voice volume. For those individuals only. Some of the people you support, many of the people who you support, have limited vocabularies. In order for them to understand you, you may have to weigh your words and use words that are not unnecessarily complex so that they understand you. If you had a PhD in psychology and you never had an introductory course, and I wanted to share with you the same information, I would need to be sensitive, perhaps, that because you've never had the introductory course, that I might not use the same words in sharing this information with you that I do with you. However, I would not use an age-inappropriate tone of voice. I would still use the same tone of voice for both of you. There may be some people who you support who have receptive auditory aphasia. And if they're going to understand us, it may be necessary that we speak at a slower rate. And there are some people who have limited attention spans. Many people, a huge percentage of the people you support have limited attention spans. So it may be necessary that we speak in short phrases, simple sentences, rather than sentences that are compound using, multiple clauses in a sentence. Bottom line is, there is no reason to use an age-inappropriate tone of voice when speaking to individuals. Another important tool of courtesy is include the individual in the conversation. It's an important tool of courtesy. Include the individual in the conversation. Don't talk about people in front of them as if they are not there. Now, there's several strategies, several tools that we can use to make this happen. Let us say, for instance, that I'm a staff here, and he's a staff here, and you're an individual who we support. You tend not to speak. You use a wheelchair for your mobility. And there's something that I need to share with you. You just came on duty. You're not aware of what happened this morning. And so what I say is the following is, you need to keep a close eye on Sylvia. This morning she had a seizure. It lasted about 2.5 minutes. And for about 40 seconds she had some difficulty in breathing. What am I doing? I'm literally talking about Sylvia in front of her as if she is not there. Not respectful. Alternative would be the following as indicated here, communicate to the individual. So I could say, Sylvia, I was really concerned about the seizure that you had this morning. It went on for nearly 2.5 minutes, and you had some difficulty breathing for about 40 seconds. By the way, if she does not have to understand what I'm saying, and if he doesn't understand, we're all in trouble, okay? So I can share the information with the individual. That's the skill of courtesy. Unrelated to whether they understand or not, the staff who I want to impart the information to can certainly pick it up from this conversation, which demonstrates a lot more etiquette than me talking to the other staff member as if she is not even there. Well, let's say your feeling is, well, Tom, I really don't want to do it that way. Well, there's another way to do it. Another way to do it is, Sylvia, Vince just came on duty, and I want to share with him about the seizure you had this morning. Is that okay? I can ask her, and assuming that she understands, and she says, that's okay, I can share it with him. Let us say that she doesn't understand the question. If she doesn't give me a negative response, I will treat that as a positive response, and then I will say, well, okay, I will share it with him. So the second option in this skill of courtesy is ask the individual's permission to share the information. And the third option is, Sylvia, Victor just came on duty, and I got to spend a moment sharing some information with him. We'll be on the other side of the room. We'll be back in just a moment. So I can just let her know that we're going to step away so I can share the information, not in her presence, but away from her. There's a number of options, and I'm sure your creative minds will come up with additional options as well. Another important tool of courtesy is sharing your thoughts. Very important. Sharing your thoughts. One of the hallmarks of an institution. What's an institution? Real loud. What is it? Ah, you're doing good. Let's do it one more time. What is it? State of mind. Good. That's what I want to hear. You're doing great. So directive conversation, what is that? Directive conversation is, can you put your clothes in the hamper? And by the way, we can make directive conversation courteous. And I have no problem with people engaging in directive conversation. See, this is part of our job. Part of our job is to prompt people, to let them know the things that they need to do to get on with their life, to give them the kind of supports and assistance they need. So I have no problem with directive conversation. You'll see what the problem is in a moment. Can you close the door, please? It's rather noisy in the hall. Again, directive. Can you turn the radio down? I think it's bothering several of the other folks here. Thank you very much. Again, directive, but courteous. Can you wash your hands? We're going to have lunch now. Again, appropriate, but there's something missing. Casual conversation. That's what we need to do. Engage in casual conversation. Casual conversation is a hallmark of courtesy. Casual conversation is, my grandmother is in the hospital, so if you see that I'm a little saddened today, it's because I'm concerned of receiving a call that her condition might have worsened. Casual conversation. What would you like to do tonight? It looks like it's going to be a wonderful evening. Your hair looks great. Oh, there's a good example of casual conversation. That is called celebrating people's gifts. That's an important tool. That's an important tool of courtesy. Celebrating people's gifts. Oh, your hair looks so lovely. Your eyes are just gorgeous. I heard you sing. What a great voice. I heard you laugh the other day. Your laugh is contagious. Do you go around celebrating people's gifts? I'm going to make a statement, and I'm always hesitant to make this. But in the eyes of most normatives, people who have significant developmental disabilities are not attractive. I'm going to say it again. By the way, normatives, that's what I call you and I. If we're going to label them, I'm going to label us. In the eyes of most normatives, people who have significant developmental disabilities are not attractive. Why? Most people, if they see someone who has unarrested hydrocephalus and his head is the size of this overhead projector, they don't consider that attractive. Most people do not consider it attractive if somebody is drooling constantly. Most normatives do not consider it attractive if somebody has significant contractures of their body. See, you and I can see through that. We know the person. But the typical person out there can't see through that. Can you imagine having a life and no one sees anything about you as attractive, and the only time people look at you is when you're at the mall and they're staring at you because you look so strange? Now imagine having staff who are there to support you, who never even come on over to celebrate your gifts. So one of the tools we need to exercise is celebrating people's gifts. It's part of casual conversation. Celebrate gifts. Next. It sure is cold outside. Casual conversation. And here's the rule. It's the 1 to 4 rule. It's a really good rule to follow. It says every time you engage in a directive comment to somebody, which is necessary, and I'm not even suggesting that you need to decrease the number of directive comments you make. I mean, it's appropriate to say to somebody is, gee, we're going to have lunch now. Did you remember to do what before we have lunch? Okay, like wash your hands. It's a directive comment. That's fine. But the 1 to 4 rule says every time you engage in a directive comment, you're now obligated for 4 casual statements. And if you stop to think about it, it doesn't mean immediately following. It just means in our overall relationship. That's not asking for much at all. You know, when one meets somebody new in their life, and let's assume it's a romantic relationship, and you go back and you think about any romantic relationships you may have had, and you ask yourself, well, what percentage of my conversation was casual versus directive? Most people, when I've asked the question, will say that 95, perhaps 95% of the interaction was casual. You know, talking about my favorite music, and I got a call from my mom or dad last night, and this is what I did at work, and gee, you want to plan, what are we planning on doing this weekend? Most of our conversation is casual. And then over time, if a relationship begins to deteriorate, what happens to the amount of casual conversation versus directive? The directive goes up, the casual goes down, and by the time the relationship is over with, probably 95% of all the conversation is directive rather than casual. And there is a word that is a very important word. It describes what happens when we use these skills of courtesy, these tools. And here is the word. A very important word. The word is bond. Bond. And do you know what I believe? I can't prove what I'm about to say, but I believe it to be true. I believe that when you bond with people, they're less likely to behave in a way to disappoint you. I believe that when you bond with people, whether it's your own children, your significant other, the people who you support, when you bond with people, they're less likely to behave in a way to disappoint you. And these skills, these tools of courtesy, quality interaction, is the pathway to bonding. And most importantly, this is how you and I would wish to be treated. Another important tool in these skills of courtesy is respecting privileged information. And I'm not referencing privileged information in terms of sharing confidential information with people outside of your organization. That's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is telling of tales and humorous anecdotes regarding the people you support is insensitive and rude. Yes, there are many times that the people who we support, not unlike ourselves, may engage in a behavior that is humorous but doesn't shed a positive light upon their character or their personality. And then, on occasion, I'll hear some staff members share that with somebody else with whom they work. My concern is not that it's a violation of HIPAA or the Privacy Act. My concern is it's not the way you or I would want to be treated. So the behavior in which we need to engage regarding our observation of the behavior of the people we support is on a need-to-know basis. If other people do not need to have that information, then don't share it. Sometimes the folks who you support are difficult to understand. You know, they are. And when somebody is difficult to understand and we can't interpret their verbalizations, we should not behave as if we do. When an individual is difficult to understand, ask, "Can you please repeat?" It is a skill of courtesy. We've all interacted with individuals for whom English is not their native language and they have a pronounced foreign accent. And it's so discourteous when someone's interacting with an individual and they can't be understood because of their accent, and somebody is acting like they understand what they're talking about when they really can't. It's not courteous. So we ask the person, "I'm sorry, I can't understand you. Can you please repeat?" Now, in some instances, some of the men and women who we support may have very low thresholds with regard to their willingness to repeat what they're saying. And if that's the case, I may not ask them to repeat. However, I could say, "Can you show me what you're trying to communicate to me?" And sometimes the guy runs to his bedroom or the other end of the room where he's receiving services and brings over the transistor radio and goes, letting me know that the battery is dead. Or sometimes we need to ask that individual's permission to ask somebody who knows that person well to interpret what they're saying. Frequently, if one knows an individual really well, their speech is more easily understood. We never turn to someone else and say, "Can you tell me what Bob just said?" without asking that person's permission, because we need to remember that the other people in that area were not part of that conversation. And so we need to ask that person's permission. And I want to give you all a warning with regard to the skills of courtesy. Some of you support people who are very capable and competent. Some of you support people who are easily understood and very physically capable. Some of you support people who are employed, perhaps even receiving very little job coaching. They are so independent. Some of you, on the other hand, support people who are not able to walk, use wheelchairs, and may not even have the ability to turn the wheels to the wheelchair on their own. Their speech may not be interpretable to anyone around them, and they may not even speak. Those of you who support people in the first group, those of you who support people who are very intellectually and physically capable, I'm not really concerned about your skills of etiquette. I'm not as concerned about your use of the tools of courtesy and the quality of your interaction. I think you're going to do a good job. It's those of you in this room who support people who have significant physical and intellectual limitations. Those of you I am very concerned about. The reason I am concerned is the following. The less capable and competent we perceive the person to be, the less likely we will relate to them in a courteous way. The less capable and competent we perceive the person to be, the more likely we will use an age-appropriate tone of voice, the more likely we will engage in towing, the more likely we will engage in melon patting. The less capable and competent we perceive the person to be, the more likely we will talk about them in front of them as if they are not even there. The less capable and competent we perceive the person to be, the more likely we won't even engage in eye contact with them when we're interacting with them. So the heads up is, the warning is, the less capable and competent you perceive the person to be, the less courtesy we will give them. And I want to leave you with one final thought. A wheelchair is not a hearing aid in disguise. So when you're interacting with people who use wheelchairs, there is no reason to raise your voice volume. Their level of comprehension does not improve. Talk to people softly. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye.